On July 14, 1998, a 5-year-old boy disappeared inside Olympic National Forest, Washington State. His name was Cole Matthews. Police records indicate that the disappearance occurred in the early afternoon during a family camping trip at a developed campground near the northern boundary of the park. Cole was last seen sometime between 2:15 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. The exact moment could not be established. What was established early on was what did not happen. No one saw Cole leave the campsite. No one heard him cry or call out. No disturbance was reported by nearby campers. At 3:07 p.m., Cole's parents contacted park authorities. Police were notified shortly after. Cole Matthews had arrived at the campground that morning with his parents, Jonathan and Elaine Matthews, residents of Tacoma, Washington. The trip was meant to last 2 nights. They had chosen a maintained campsite rather than a remote area, believing it reduced risk. According to their statements, Cole had been playing near the tent while lunch was being prepared. He was not wandering freely through the campground. He did not have access to water or steep terrain from the immediate area. Elaine Matthews later told police that she noticed the silence first. She expected to hear movement. She expected to hear Cole's voice. When she looked toward the tent, he was gone. Jonathan Matthews began searching the immediate area within minutes. He checked the space behind the tent, nearby picnic tables, and the short trail leading away from the campground loop. At that stage, the situation was not treated as an emergency. Children were known to wander short distances. Police later noted that the Matthews attempted to locate Cole themselves before requesting assistance. Approximately 20 minutes passed. Jonathan Matthews began shouting his son's name. There was no response. Police and park rangers arrived at the campsite within minutes of the call. The initial assessment focused on containment. Officers canvassed the immediate area, spoke to nearby campers, and confirmed that no one recalled seeing a child leave alone. By 3:45 p.m., the situation was formally escalated. Search and rescue protocols were initiated. The campground was placed under informal control. Visitors were asked to remain until their information was recorded. Police began logging vehicle descriptions and times of departure. A command post was established before sunset. Search planning followed standard procedure. Investigators identified high-probability zones based on known lost child behavior. Teams were assigned to trails, drainage areas, and open ground. The assumption was that Cole had wandered and become disoriented. By nightfall, more than 30 personnel were involved. The first night produced no results. No footprints could be confirmed as Cole's. No clothing or personal items were found. No signs of injury or accidental fall were identified. Canine units were deployed early the following morning. Handlers attempted to establish a scent trail using clothing provided by the family. The dog showed brief interest near the campsite before losing the scent entirely. At the time, this was attributed to heavy foot traffic. Police documented the detail and moved on. Over the next 2 days, the search expanded. Helicopters conducted aerial sweeps when weather allowed. Ground teams moved farther into forested areas where visibility dropped sharply and movement slowed to a crawl. Investigators noted that the terrain was difficult even for trained searchers. Still, nothing belonging to Cole Matthews was located. By the 3rd day, police began to reassess their assumptions. Cole had not followed a trail. He had not moved downhill toward water. He had not been located in any of the areas considered statistically likely. Several campers reported seeing a child earlier in the afternoon. Descriptions varied. None could confirm a time or direction. One report mentioned a man near a parked vehicle at the edge of the campground. The description was vague. There was no indication of interaction with a child. The information was recorded and not pursued further. Public statements remained cautious. Police emphasized that many missing children were found days after disappearing. They avoided speculation. Privately, concern was growing. The case was not behaving like a typical lost child incident. By the end of the first week, the search radius had expanded significantly. Resources were strained. Leads were exhausted. Police began discussing reduction timelines. On the 9th day, active search operations were scaled back. The decision followed protocol. Officials stated that the investigation remained open and that any new information would be pursued. The Matthews were informed directly before the announcement was made public. The forest reopened fully. Cole Matthews was officially classified as a missing person. At that point, there was still no evidence of a crime, but there was also no explanation. Where are you watching this video from? Leave your location in the comments below. I'm always curious how far these stories can travel and how they manage to connect us across every distance. And now, let's continue the story. In the weeks following Cole Matthews' disappearance, police focused on the explanation that required the least imagination. The working theory was simple. A child wandered into the forest and did not survive. This assumption shaped everything that followed. Investigators reviewed lost child statistics, mapped likely movement patterns, and compared Cole's case to previous incidents in Olympic National Forest. The data suggested that most children were found within a short distance of where they were last seen, usually injured or exhausted. Cole did not fit the pattern, but the pattern remained. Police interviewed every family in the campground. They documented vehicles, travel routes, and planned departure times. Nothing indicated urgency or suspicious behavior. No one reported seeing Cole with an adult who was not his parent. The absence of evidence was not treated as evidence of absence. Instead, it reinforced the initial assumption. Attention shifted away from the campground itself and deeper into the forest. Investigators reasoned that if Cole had wandered, he would have followed terrain downward toward water or open space. Teams returned to creeks, ravines, and dense undergrowth that had already been searched. They found nothing. Police examined the Matthews family closely. This was standard procedure. Parents were interviewed separately and repeatedly. Timelines were reconstructed down to the minute. Their statements remained consistent. There were no signs of neglect, no history of violence, no contradictions that suggested deception. The family was cleared quietly. As weeks passed, the case lost urgency outside the immediate circle of investigators. Resources were reallocated, leads slowed, tips from the public increased, but their quality declined. Most were sightings reported days or weeks later. Many were in different towns. Some were in different states. None were confirmed. Police pursued several of these leads anyway. Officers followed up on reports of children resembling Cole seen in grocery stores, roadside rest stops, and campgrounds hundreds of miles away. Every lead collapsed under verification. What remained was a growing list of explanations that did not quite hold together. If Cole had wandered, why was no trace found? If he had been injured, why no sign of disturbance? If an animal attack had occurred, why no physical evidence? The forest was dangerous, but it was not silent. Internally, investigators began to acknowledge a possibility they were not prepared to pursue publicly, that Cole Matthews might not have been lost. There was, however, nothing concrete to support that conclusion. No witnesses, no forensic evidence, no confirmed sightings, and without those, the case could not move forward. By the end of the first year, the investigation had transitioned into maintenance mode. Tips were logged, files were updated, patrol officers were briefed periodically in case Cole was encountered, during routine work. But there was no active direction. The Matthews family continued to contact police regularly. They asked about progress, about leads, about whether anything had changed. The answer was almost always the same. There was nothing new. Investigators noted the emotional toll in internal reports, but it did not alter the trajectory of the case. Without evidence, police could not justify expanded operations. Time passed. By the third year, Cole Matthews' file was physically moved. It was no longer kept with active missing person cases. It was placed in storage, accessible but no longer present. No one announced the shift. It happened quietly. When a new investigator reviewed the file during a routine audit, he noted something unusual. Not a piece of evidence, but a pattern. Cole's disappearance had been treated as isolated. The review questioned that assumption. There were other cases. Children reported missing near forested areas, families on temporary trips, disappearances with no confirmed witnesses. The similarities were not exact. They did not share locations or dates. At the time, no one had connected them. The observation was noted and set aside. There was still nothing to link them. Without a body, without physical proof of a crime, the idea could not be pursued. The case remained what it had been from the beginning, an unsolved disappearance. Police closed the audit and returned the file to storage. Cole Matthews had been missing for 3 years. The forest had given nothing back. Time did not solve the disappearance of Cole Matthews. It only changed how it was remembered. 3 years after the camping trip in Olympic National Forest, the case existed mostly on paper. Police records were intact, properly filed, and rarely opened. There were no active leads to follow, no new tips that survived basic verification. The investigation had not failed in a dramatic way. It had simply stopped moving. Cold cases rarely become cold because of a single mistake. More often, they cool gradually, through repetition and exhaustion. Every plausible explanation is considered, then reconsidered, until none of them produce results. Cole's case followed that path. Police periodically reviewed the file. The same details appeared every time. The same unanswered questions were listed, then set aside. Without new information, investigators could not justify reopening search operations or requesting additional resources. The forest remained unchanged. In those 3 years, Olympic National Forest saw thousands of visitors. Trails were maintained, campsites were renovated. Weather erased most physical traces that might once have existed. If evidence had been there, it no longer was. The Matthews family did not move on in the way people expected them to. Jonathan Matthews returned to work within months, but coworkers noted changes. He became quieter, more precise. He avoided conversations that drifted toward family or recreation. Elaine Matthews kept detailed records. She maintained a folder of correspondence with police, missing person organizations, and volunteer groups. Dates were underlined, names were written carefully. Every phone call was logged. Police reports later described her as cooperative and composed. They did not describe what happened when interviews ended. From an investigative standpoint, there was nothing more to extract from the family. They had been cleared early and repeatedly. Their grief, while documented, was not treated as evidentiary. As time passed, the disappearance of Cole Matthews began to compete with other cases for attention. New missing person reports arrived. Some involved adults, others involved children. Each case demanded immediate resources. Older files were pushed further back. This was not negligence. It was triage. One detail, however, began to stand out to a small number of investigators during periodic reviews. Cole Matthews was 5 years old. He disappeared from a controlled environment. There were no signs of panic or injury, and there was no trace of movement away from the campsite. These facts did not align with accidental disappearance. They also did not align with the most common alternative explanations. Police considered the possibility of abduction early on. The problem was not reluctance. The problem was evidence. There was no confirmed sighting of Cole with another adult, no vehicle description that could be tied to a specific individual, no forensic trace linking. The disappearance to a crime. Without those elements, police could not classify the case as a kidnapping. It remained an unexplained disappearance. During a routine review, an investigator flagged a report that had received little attention at the time. It came from a camper who had left the campground the afternoon Cole disappeared. The camper recalled a vehicle parked briefly near the access road. The description was generic, the timing uncertain. The report had been recorded, assessed, and dismissed. Nothing in it suggested criminal behavior. Still, it remained in the file. As investigators revisited older cases across the region, similar reports appeared. Vehicles parked in unusual places, short stops near campgrounds, individuals who did not stay long enough to draw attention. None of these reports were connected. At the time, there was no reason to connect them. Police did not have a suspect. They did not have a method. They did not have a pattern that could withstand scrutiny. The absence of a body remained the defining limitation. Without remains, investigators could not determine cause of death. They could not establish time or location. They could not prove that a crime had occurred. The case stayed dormant. 3 years after Cole Matthews vanished, his disappearance was no closer to resolution than it had been in the first week. The forest had absorbed the event without consequence. Police closed another annual review. Cole Matthews' name remained on the list of missing children. Nothing suggested that would change. On October 3, 2001, nearly 3 years after Cole Matthews disappeared, a hunter entered a restricted section of Olympic National Forest. The area was not marked as dangerous. It was simply less traveled. The terrain sloped gradually, away from established trails, toward a stretch of dense woodland that most visitors avoided. The hunter was not searching for anything unusual. At approximately 9:40 a.m., he noticed something out of place near the base of a fallen tree. At first, he thought it was debris. Closer inspection suggested otherwise. What he found was reported to police within the hour. Responding officers secured the location and requested forensic support. The site was cordoned off before noon. Access was limited. No media were notified. What lay on the forest floor was a partial set of skeletal remains. Initial assessment confirmed the bones were human. Further examination indicated they belonged to a child. Police did not release that information immediately. The remains were located approximately 12 miles from the campground where Cole Matthews had last been seen. The distance alone challenged the assumptions that had guided the investigation for years. This was not a place a 5-year-old could reasonably reach on foot. The scene offered little context. There was no evidence of a struggle, no clothing scattered nearby, no personal items that could immediately identify the child. What drew investigators' attention was an object positioned several feet from the remains, a suitcase. It was medium-sized, dark-colored, and heavily weathered. The material showed signs of prolonged exposure to moisture and soil. It was not torn or damaged in a way consistent with animal activity. It did not belong in the forest. Police documented the scene carefully. Every object was photographed in place before being moved. The suitcase was sealed and transported separately. Forensic analysis would take time. At this stage, police did not publicly associate the discovery with Cole Matthews. They issued a brief statement acknowledging that human remains had been found and that an investigation was underway. Privately, investigators understood the implications. The location suggested deliberate placement. The distance suggested transportation. The suitcase suggested intent. The remains were transferred to the medical examiner's office. Anthropological analysis confirmed the age range matched Cole Matthews. Dental records later provided formal identification. The confirmation was delivered to the Matthews family in person. Police reports described the notification as controlled and procedural. They did not describe the silence that followed. With the discovery of the remains, the investigation changed classification. This was no longer a missing person case, it was a homicide. Investigators returned to the original file with new purpose. Every assumption was reevaluated. Timelines were reconstructed. Early reports that had been dismissed were re-examined. The suitcase became central to the investigation. It contained no identification, no labels, no personal items that could be traced to a retailer or owner. Fiber analysis suggested it was commercially manufactured and widely sold. Soil samples taken from inside the suitcase did not match the immediate area where it was found. The implication was clear. The remains had not decomposed at that location. Someone had brought them there. Police widened the scope of the investigation beyond Olympic National Forest. They requested assistance from neighboring jurisdictions and federal agencies. Missing person cases involving children were reviewed again, this time with a different lens. Patterns that had once seemed coincidental were reconsidered. The idea that Cole Matthews' disappearance was an isolated incident was no longer defensible. By the end of the week, investigators were no longer asking how a child became lost in the forest. They were asking who had brought him there, and why. On October 3, 2001, nearly 3 years after Cole Matthews disappeared, a hunter entered a restricted section of Olympic National Forest. The area was not marked as dangerous, it was simply less traveled. The terrain sloped gradually away from established trails toward a stretch of dense woodland that most visitors avoided. The hunter was not searching for anything unusual. At approximately 9:40 a.m., he noticed something out of place near the base of a fallen tree. At first, he thought it was debris. Closer inspection suggested otherwise. What he found was reported to police within the hour. Responding officers secured the location and requested forensic support. The site was cordoned off before noon. Access was limited. No media were notified. What lay on the forest floor was a partial set of skeletal remains. Initial assessment confirmed the bones were human. Further examination indicated they belonged to a child. Police did not release that information immediately. The remains were located approximately 12 miles from the campground where Cole Matthews had last been seen. The distance alone challenged the assumptions that had guided the investigation for years. This was not a place a 5-year-old could reasonably reach on foot. The scene offered little context. There was no evidence of a struggle, no clothing scattered nearby, no personal items that could immediately identify the child. What drew investigators' attention was an object positioned several feet from the remains, a suitcase. It was medium-sized, dark-colored, and heavily weathered. The material showed signs of prolonged exposure to moisture and soil. It was not torn or damaged in a way consistent with animal activity. It did not belong in the forest. Police documented the scene carefully. Every object was photographed in place before being moved. The suitcase was sealed and transported separately. Forensic analysis would take time. At this stage, police did not publicly associate the discovery with Cole Matthews. They issued a brief statement acknowledging that human remains had been found and that an investigation was underway. Privately, investigators understood the implications. The location suggested deliberate placement. The distance suggested transportation. The suitcase suggested intent. The remains were transferred to the medical examiner's office. Anthropological analysis confirmed the age range matched Cole Matthews. Dental records later provided formal identification. The confirmation was delivered to the Matthews family in person. Police reports described the notification as controlled and procedural. They did not describe the silence that followed. With the discovery of the remains, the investigation changed classification. This was no longer a missing person case. It was a homicide. Investigators returned to the original file with new purpose. Every assumption was reevaluated. Timelines were reconstructed. Early reports that had been dismissed were re-examined. The suitcase became central to the investigation. It contained no identification, no labels, no personal items that could be traced to a retailer or owner. Fiber analysis suggested it was commercially manufactured and widely sold. Soil samples taken from inside the suitcase did not match the immediate area where it was found. The implication was clear. The remains had not decomposed at that location. Someone had brought them there. Police widened the scope of the investigation beyond Olympic National Forest. They requested assistance from neighboring jurisdictions and federal agencies. Missing person cases involving children were reviewed again, this time with a different lens. Patterns that had once seemed coincidental were reconsidered. The idea that Cole Matthews' disappearance was an isolated incident was no longer defensible. By the end of the week, investigators were no longer asking how a child became lost in the forest. They were asking who had brought him there and why. Once investigators had a name, the pace of the case changed, not because answers came quickly, but because movement finally had direction. The man identified through interstate records was Evan Rourke, 38 years old at the time his name surfaced in the Cole Matthews investigation. He had no fixed address. His employment history consisted of short-term labor jobs across the western United States, construction sites, seasonal warehouse work, temporary maintenance contracts. He stayed long enough to be paid, then moved on. Police reconstructed his travel history using traffic stops, employment records, and credit card activity. The pattern aligned with the mapped corridor investigators had already drawn. Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Idaho. Over a period of nearly 10 years. Rourke owned multiple vehicles during that time, all older models purchased secondhand. Registration records showed frequent changes. None of the vehicles remained in his possession for long. This explained why earlier reports had never converged. There had been nothing stable to follow. Investigators initiated surveillance quietly. They did not approach him immediately. They needed confirmation, not suspicion. Rourke was located in Arizona, working a temporary job near a national park. Police observed his movements for several days. He followed familiar routines. He avoided extended interaction. He spent time near public recreation areas without appearing to participate in them. There was nothing overtly criminal. That was the point. Investigators obtained a warrant to search a storage unit Rourke had rented under his own name months earlier. Inside, police found personal effects, tools, and several items of luggage. One suitcase matched the model found near Cole Matthews' remains. It was not conclusive, but it was enough. Rourke was taken into custody without incident. He did not resist. During the arrest, officers noted his demeanor as calm and detached. He asked procedural questions. He did not ask why he was being detained. During interrogation, Rourke initially denied involvement. He acknowledged frequent travel. He acknowledged visiting campgrounds. He denied contact with any missing children. Police presented him with timelines, locations, dates, overlaps. When confronted with forensic results linking soil from one of his vehicles to material found inside the suitcase, his responses slowed. He stopped offering explanations. Eventually, he stopped speaking altogether. A search of Rourke's past revealed more. Several missing child cases previously considered unrelated were reopened. Forensic comparisons confirmed matches between recovered remains and children who had disappeared years earlier. Different states, different parks, the same pattern. Rourke was charged with multiple counts of murder. The Cole Matthews case became the anchor for the prosecution, not because it was the first, but because it was the one that exposed the movement. In court, Rourke showed little reaction. He did not address the families. He did not dispute the evidence once it was presented in full. The trial did not bring closure in the way it was often described. It brought confirmation. Cole Matthews had not wandered into the forest. He had not been lost. He had been taken. The Matthews family attended the sentencing. Police reports described them as composed. There was no statement that resolved the wait of 3 years. Rourke received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. His name was added to a list of serial offenders whose crimes spanned jurisdictions and years. After the case concluded, investigators reviewed their own work. They identified no single failure. They identified no missed confession. They identified a system built to recognize patterns only after they repeated. Cole Matthews's disappearance remained unsolved for years, not because it was invisible, but because it resembled too many other things: lost children, accidents, assumptions. The forest had never held the answer. It had only hidden the delay. Cole Matthews was 5 years old. His case changed how police classified disappearances near transitional spaces across multiple states. That was the legacy left behind. Not resolution, but recognition.
Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next videos, where we continue to follow the mysteries that have never slept. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned